Often reviled as being one of the worst video games of all time, this title has long intrigued me from a distance, from its antiquated choice of source material to its outrageous cover art and unconventional gameplay mechanics. After finally putting in the effort to play through it myself and make a serious attempt to understand what the developers may have intended, I soon became very fascinated and honestly a bit smitten with this unique experience, and can safely say there's a lot more to this unfairly maligned and misunderstood piece of gaming infamy. So with open minds and hearts, let's take a nice and slow walk through the world of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde on the NES. So this game was first released in Japan for the Famicom in 1988 as Homa ga Toki, published by Toho, a company much better known for its film and animation production. The game was also released in the US 1 year later, published by Bandai, with quite a few differences which we'll get into later. Development credits also include Advanced Communication Company, who worked on a handful of 8 and 16-bit games at the time, ranging from audacious titles like Dino Wars and Mecha Robot Golf, to some of the well-regarded early console conversions of the East series. The game lacks any production credits, but it's also generally assumed that the music was by Michiharu Hasuya, who also composed the music on Rygar. Because yeah, that title screen music is straight out of Rygar. Anyways, here they have taken on the bold task of adapting Robert Louis Stevenson's classic 1886 novella Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde into a video game for the first time. Perhaps an unusual choice of media for this landmark piece of gothic horror literature, but maybe not totally surprising considering it has been adapted hundreds of times into films, stage productions, and numerous other forms of media. Here's my quick high school book report summary. The well-respected Dr. Jekyll creates a drug that transforms him into a vicious alter ego, unleashing his innermost primal desires and repressed violent urges, and eventually losing control to his dark side. That's an immensely oversimplified summary. There are many deeper themes on duality and morality within that we'll touch on a bit more as we dig deeper into the game. So we start off controlling Dr. Jekyll, who is on his way to his wedding with Miss Millicent, a character not actually from the original book, but from one of the 1920s films. At first glance, this seems to be like a fairly typical action platformer game. You walk to the right, you can jump and duck, and you have a basic cane attack. But right away, you'll notice that your actions are extremely subdued. Jekyll's movement is rather polite, strolling ever so slowly through these Victorian-era settings, while the world around him is designed to irritate. From the townspeople to the poop-dropping wildlife, everything seems to be out to get you, reducing your life meter and increasing your stress meter, all while you can't really do a whole lot to fight back. With the exception of the bees, your cane will not fend off anything, a quirk that will often bewilder and confuse new players. And once your stress meter hits full capacity, Jekyll loses control to his Hyde persona, transporting you to a world of demons, a crumbling and dilapidated version of London filled with bizarre and surreal creatures. Now as Mr. Hyde, the screen will auto-scroll back to the left as you push your stress meter back to the Jekyll side by defeating any enemies in your path with either a simple punch attack or your trademark Psycho Wave, an erratic fireball thing that is apparently cool enough to be promoted on the front of the North American box art. These sections are remarkably different from the Jekyll gameplay, with a much faster paced action and character movement. Basically, you'll need to stay alive and kill enough enemies before reaching the inverted point of progress in the stage that Jekyll had made it to. Otherwise, you'll be instantly blasted by lightning and game over. Now, you do get unlimited continues at least. And like many old NES games, these concepts are explained in the manual, but certainly not very clear if you just turn this on and start playing without reading that first. So what often happens for probably 90% of first-time players who don't know what to expect here, you walk around as Jekyll for a few seconds, maybe trying to hit stuff with your cane, it doesn't do anything, and then one of these bomb maniac guys absolutely wrecks you. Then you turn into Hyde, and you excitedly shoot things for a few seconds, but quickly get a game over since you didn't make much progress with Jekyll. And without much more effort than that, I totally get that one can assume the game is garbage. And honestly, I wouldn't recommend this game to someone looking for a straightforward, fun action game. But if you're like me and willing to delve into the murky depths of jank and experience something a bit more unconventional, I'd say this one is worth a deeper look. First of all, you'll need to develop some tactics to survive as long as possible as Jekyll, and come to the reality that sometimes you just can't really avoid getting stressed out. And in another true-to-life concept, things are pretty unpredictable. Townspeople will suddenly start moving very quickly and bump into you, little Billy will shoot you with his slingshot, birds will drop giant piles of poo on you, singing ladies will spray dissonant notes all over the screen until you pay them to shut up anyways. Cats, dogs, spiders, bees, dead ducks, grave diggers, barrels, there's a lot of nonsense Jekyll has to deal with, all while retaining his composure as a distinguished member of society. Most importantly though, you really need to be careful around these bomb maniacs. Once you run into one of these guys, he drops a bomb and you need to get as far away from it as you can, as the inconsistent hitbox of the explosion is much larger than its sprite. Eventually you'll even need to carefully time a jump while you run away, or potentially take a massive hit to your health and stress levels. And once you're in Hyde form, you can finally have some fun, let your violent side cut loose and unleash your barrage of psycho waves, and even move and jump around at a more video gamey speed. But there are certainly some control quirks to contend with here as well. Your auto-scrolling movement is limited to the right half of the screen, and it's worth mentioning that while you can jump on your own, Hyde will automatically jump over any steps or obstacles in his path, sometimes right into a flying rock monster thing. Also, executing your Psycho Wave might not be obvious to use at first, as you'll need to press up and B to use this attack. Otherwise you'll just be punching, which does work alright on some enemies, but those erratic flying creatures will be much harder to deal with, especially with stronger and weirder beasts appearing the further you get into the game. I found that punching actually comes more in handy as a defensive tactic to destroy any incoming projectiles. So other than those strats, you'll basically just want to kill as many enemies as you can, take as little damage as you can, and then get back to Jekyll form, which will also restore a good amount of health after the transformation is complete. This back and forth struggle between your alternating good and evil egos will not only cause you to ponder the duality of human nature, but also really make you hate barrels. And finally, at the game's conclusion, you will reach the church for this end? That's it? Okay, not quite. Things get even weirder on the final stage, as the game's true ending is found by first reaching the church as Hyde. And this is not explained in the manual, by the way. So basically, once you reach the final level, you'll intentionally transform, preferably by losing as little health as possible, endure a rather difficult rooftop battle that includes a few instant death pitfalls, until you eventually reach the church and a final boss battle. Now the footage here is from the Famicom version. This one shows a creepy hanging body from the church cross once you beat the boss. And then you turn back into Jekyll and can enjoy a stress-free walk to the church, and you actually get to see your lovely Millicent and enjoy an animated wedding procession sequence, and a nice little jump scare as well, as a poignant reminder that the Hyde in all of us will always be there. And these different endings were some of the most fascinating things about this game to me, where you're not rewarded with the better ending by completely trying to suppress Hyde, but rather to attain a balance between the two. The stark contrasts in gameplay between the game's modes really reinforce this concept as well, with Jekyll's gameplay being what I consider to be intentionally frustrating and annoying, and actually instilling and encouraging those primal urges of the player to just be able to unleash carnage as Hyde. Now, I'm not going to claim that the philosophical underpinnings of the novella translated flawlessly into a video game, but I have to applaud the effort that was made to attempt such a thing. So I mentioned the Famicom version earlier, and I should say that it has quite a lot more content than what we got in the US. Due to modifications made to the cartridge board in the North American release, many of the graphics were cut or simply made inaccessible, including 2 entire levels and many sprites and enemy types. The US version still has the same number of levels, but instead just recycles the backgrounds in 2 of them. Notably, the Japanese version also adds things like people throwing garbage out of their windows, and even some occupied houses that you can go into that will either help or hurt you. The demon world also gets this exclusive siren-like enemy, which plays some different music while on screen. And weirdly enough, the North American manual still mentions these omitted game elements, so it may have been written before they had to make the cartridge modifications. So if you do have the choice, I'd say the Famicom version is the definitive one to play, and it's maybe a little bit more difficult as well. Now in the end, I'm really glad I gave this game a proper chance. Obviously it has its flaws, and I'm not going to necessarily recommend it to everyone. You really need to be open-minded and patient here, and absorb this one more like an 8-bit allegory as opposed to a good old jump 'em up. I do think it's a shame that it has garnered such a negative reputation, as I can list off plenty of more incoherent and low-effort NES games that weren't trying something so unique like this. I guess if anything, it's a good reminder that one person's trash is another's treasure, or that some of the most interesting things in life will take a little more effort to uncover. And don't forget to let out a few of those pent-up psycho waves every once in a while. And if you've dared to play this one, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.